Boa noite, o meu nome é André Corrêa de Almeida, sou de Lisboa, I'm from Lisbon, and according to the rules of this panel, I'll be speaking in English. It's a fascinating, I used to have a singer-songwriter career, so I guess I know how it works. Okay, better. Fascinating to be the last because we talked about people being the center, and we also talked about technology being the center. And looking at this panel, I mean, I just came from Lisbon yesterday. I'll be in Cascais tomorrow, twice in Barcelona last year. Unfortunately, I still don't know if I can be at the World Expo in November, this November, and I'll be back in New York Monday. Besides teaching and running a master's in development at the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia, I research how city administrations, variações, city administrations and municipalities innovate. So not cities at large, but specifically how innovation occurs from within the public structures. And I'll explain why that's so relevant. But besides studying, I then apply this knowledge and I help stakeholders, specifically I work a lot with Brooklyn, I help stakeholders coming together and implement some of the changes that our research indicates. So the book I coordinated a group of 26 scholars from 10 different universities, including Cornell Tech, NYU, Harvard, Columbia, and others. And I partner with the New York City-based incubators, such as New Lab or Grand Central Tech, to implement some of the ideas that we develop. That's why I like to think about my work as applied research, as not only research, hence the name Applied Research for Change, ARC-X. And I'll be sharing specifically, even though there was many examples today already about what's happening at local level, I want to contextualize the problem a little bit more in global terms. And specifically, and this touches so much on issues that we've learned from Barcelona today, specifically I want to talk about the incentive systems needed to share data and build shared AI developments. And I'll get into the definitions later. Just bear with me for a second. By circulate data, we mean if data is the oil of the 21st century, the principle is that oil should be shared across citizens and systems and countries and regions. And if we think about AI, artificial intelligence, as the engines within which data circulates, so we want to empower everyone, organizations, regions, and people to hone those engines. Very similar to what we've learned from Barcelona, but maybe using different language and different perspective. Maybe I'm just going to press the button. Yeah. So it should not be a surprise to anyone in the room, but if it is, I'm glad because now this slide helps, that urban population, and we've learned from the previous presentation that urban population is increasing tremendously over, basically since the Industrial Revolution, if not before, at a very fast pace more recently. So this is not a surprise. I'm going to move forward. This should not also be a surprise that on average, the largest is the percentage of a human settlement, better off we are on average. So there must be a reason why we keep coming to cities, since, if not the agricultural revolution, since the industrial revolution. So not really a surprise, but if it's a surprise, take note of the figures. So this may become now a little bit of a surprise. So even though on average we are better off, not everyone is better off. And again, we've learned about very specific examples of two different cities in Europe, Cascais and Barcelona. So I'm framing the problem globally and why that it's so important within the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals that Erickson brought to the conversation today. Even though on average we are better off, inequality is increasing and expanding. So inequality here is measured by the slice of urban slum population living in cities and expanding, as you can see, over time. The portion of the chart at the top. This may be less intuitive for some of us. the issue is not only of inequality within cities, the issue is also about inequality between cities, between neighboring cities, between cities of different sizes. And that's what I'm getting closer to how some of the ideas that we are discussing here apply so well to Aveiro. So this chart shows the competitive edge, the competitive advantages of larger cities and mid-sized cities comparatively to lower cities, smaller cities, satellite cities, in terms of the capacity to create and retain talent. And I was speaking today over lunch with the president, the mayor of this beautiful city, and how important it is and strategic it is for Aveiro to retain talent, and actually how successful it's doing that. And this is, as I was preparing our conversation today, I was thinking of this, how reasonable and how useful may be to compare Aveiro with Brooklyn as opposed to Manhattan compared with Lisboa and Porto. And how you may know, some of you may know that currently Brooklyn surpassed Manhattan in terms of the number of jobs created in the urban tech space. So Brooklyn is growing faster in terms of the capacity to attract talent. So a question I asked today to the mayor was, how well is, comparatively speaking, how well is Aveiro doing compared with Lisboa and Porto? And I wonder, I don't have data, I didn't have to look for data, I'm sorry about that, but I would bet, and I bet lunch with the mayor. I didn't bet 3 lunches, I bet only 1 because I don't have the data, so just to be on the safe side. I bet that if you compare percentage-wise, proportionally speaking, the amount of talent that Aveiro is being able to retain compared with Lisboa and Porto, you will be surprised. So even though this slide shows some threats related to second-tier types of cities and smaller cities, which could be the case of Aveiro compared with other neighboring cities, it also points to the opportunities. And the opportunity here being illustrated by the case of Brooklyn. And so in the second part of my presentation, I will share the exact example, a very specific example around data sharing that is driving so much of development in Brooklyn compared with Manhattan. So 2 stories to illustrate the problems that we are facing here. In 2017, I was in a Smart City Conference, and I underlined Smart City Conference because the word smart here is important. I was in a Smart City Conference in Santa Clara in the Bay Area, north of California. And during lunchtime, I'm looking, this was a standing lunch, small tables, maximum 3 plates. I'm carrying my plate, and I'm looking for a table to get my meal and have my lunch. Tables were packed. I saw a table with 2 gentlemen. I approached the table, and as I approached the table, and I had Columbia University badge on my suit, as I approached the table, these 2 gentlemen say it simultaneously, and I had never met them before. We are not smart yet. Totally out of the blue. Smart City Conference. We are not smart yet. And I wonder, I tried to be cool, and I still approached the table, and I introduced myself, and I asked, why do you say that? You may not be as smart as you want, or as you would like, but I'm sure there's a lot of amazing stuff happening in your city. And these were 2 mid-sized cities in the US. But still deep in my mind, I was thinking, why these 2 city representatives, who should be extremely proud of what they're doing in their city, moreover, in a Smart City Conference, have this reaction? One problem, and this touches so much on what we've been discussing today, is that to a very large extent, innovation is still viewed as a tech and data issue. And if you talk about smart cities, and if you equate smart cities as this science fiction, I'm so happy that this conference is not called Smart Cities. So congratulations, and by the way, thank you, Câmara Municipal de Aveiro, for having me here. I'm so happy And actually, it was funny that the mayor this morning, and I had never met him, I didn't plan this accordingly, the mayor this morning, when the mayor was explaining why and the reason for the event being called Tech Days, he said something around, oh, we didn't even care about the smart city banality, the idea of smart city. The problem with the idea of smart city is that it points to this science fiction future, only attainable if you have $5 million, $10 million, and $15 million. So even though the Barcelona experience is so important for the world, we must acknowledge that the majority of the cities around the world does not have the funding and the money to engage in these science fiction smart city endeavors. So this is one of the reasons why I think these two gentlemen reacted that way, because the conversations around innovation in urban settings are for the most part still driven by tech and data and the funding needed to move things forward. The second challenge, now back 2 years. In 2015, New York, the first CTO in New York was hired in the fall of 2014. So very similar around. For how long have you been in the job? 4 years. So 2015. So New York and Barcelona were back hand in hand as they've been for some time now. Also a female, also a woman that took the job, Minerva Tentoku. She came from the banking sector in Hong Kong. So she was hired in the fall of 14, and in the summer of 15, I'm having a conversation about placing one of my students. So I supervise 100 students, and we have these summer activities, summer internships, and I asked her if she could build or host one internship for one of my students. And well, I just arrived, she brought the team, and it was not clear what the city was doing at large. So what the student was asked to do, if for 3 months the student knocked on the door of multiple city agencies to map the innovation ecosystem in New York. So the second reason, we can find other reasons, but the second reason why these gentlemen reacted that way is that for the most part, city leadership does not know what's happening in their own cities. I mean, they may know 2 or 3 flagships. For example, when Bellagio ran for presidency, for the mayor in New York, he had 2 major themes, affordable housing and Vision Zero. True, mayors and leadership know about 2 or 3 flagship programs, but for the most part, there's a lack of knowledge in terms of how the ecosystem is organized. And when I say ecosystem, I'm specifically talking about the city agencies. I'm not talking about public and private yet. I'm talking about an insight knowledge of what's happening within the city administration. And this is compounded by another element, by another piece of data that I want to share. The first row, public administration, this shows that the research conducted in the business field is 3 times more research conducted in public administration journals. And it also shows that the amount of research in the management field typically associated with the private sector is 4.5 larger than the amount of research published in public administration journals. This is just a quantity. But if you look at what the research talks about, these are keywords coming from the public administration journals. Corruption, lack of capacity, etc., bureaucracy, slowness. This is keywords coming from the literature typically related with the private sector, coming from the business and management journals. So it's not only that there's a lack of internal understanding of what's happening in the city, and also a misplacement, a misunderstanding of innovation, mostly around tech and data, is that there are dramatic misperceptions about how city agencies and municipalities are actually innovating, as illustrated by the case of Cascais. I actually met the vice mayor of Cascais 3 years ago precisely to help create these innovation narratives from within the city infrastructure. And of course, our CTO from Barcelona did a phenomenal job in explaining how the city itself is driving innovation. And to connect, and I hadn't prepared these in coordination with any of my new friends, this is a tremendous paradox, because we have the 17th SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, that talks about global partnerships. And then we don't think of mayors and municipalities and city agencies and city administrations as the true and the valid innovation players that they already are. How can we even conceive of an innovation agenda, a global innovation agenda, to face so much of the urban pressure and the urban challenges already illustrated here before, if you don't take cities, their leadership, their technicians, their engineers, their staff as serious as they should? I'm not saying as they should because I woke up in the morning and I think they should. No, it's because I've been studying, and many of us have been studying, and here documented what the cities are actually doing. So, an example. These are the 12 case studies that our book covers. The Smarter New York City, how city agencies innovate. And note that the name of the book is called Smarter. It's smarter, not smart. It points to this idea that innovating is a learning process. It's a verb. It's not an idealized, futuristic, I don't know when, type of realization. So this is, and we talked about how New York City created the Mayor's Office for Data Analytics, how Midtown in Motion was developed. This is a program to help accelerate traffic flow in Manhattan Midtown, or how Link NYC was developed. This is the structure that allows New York to have the largest public free broadband Wi-Fi coverage. Or for example, how New York City, One NYC, was the first city in the world to create a Sustainable Development Goals framework for cities. The SDGs were approved in September of 2015, initially for country level at the UN. But there were already cities building equivalent frameworks for cities. But the point is not to get into the details of each one. We don't have time. The point is this is typically how one understands a city administration in terms of innovation. Okay, yes, I know that there's a bunch of stuff happening. And I'm sure there's equivalent in Aveiro, there's equivalent in the Cascais. What we then realize, if we look carefully and if we start connecting the dots, is that this is the reality. An already existing, incredible, powerful innovation cluster that for the most part is unknown. And I will explain in 15 seconds what these ties means. These ties can be about data sharing, these ties can be about procurement bids shared, these ties can be about shared talent, these ties can be 7 types of ties that we created, that we studied. So this points to the problem that first gentleman faced and that explains his anxiety when he told me that we're not smart yet. That is explained by the fact that we don't know, for the most part, what cities are doing. City administrations, city departments. I mean, people individually may know, but from a strategic standpoint, we don't know. So this is a piece that it's as specific I can be today. So in our case studies, we broke down the 12 case studies in 4 parts. So the stories are different, but the structure of each case study is similar. We studied how each program was defined, and the problem was defined, how the intervention was designed, how the intervention or the program was implemented, and aspects of assessment. The 7 drivers that we considered. You see data and tech there? You do see data and tech there. I would be surprised if Ericsson was not a very important player or other technological partners. But other drivers are there. Leadership is playing a role. Actually, in the design phase, leadership plays a very important role. And then as we move to the design space, it seems like the boss left the room. You see the spike in the leadership shrinks. It seems like the boss left the room, and then the networks in the organizational structure come into enabling. This is not rocket science, frankly. This is important because within the context of cities around the world, with very limited or actually none resources to innovate and create innovation agendas, if we focus only on tech and data and rule out all other driving forces already in place, we miss a huge opportunity to help mayors and city leadership build innovation agendas. And for example, I argue that now with your role at the UN, that you would love to see all cities around the world capable of adopting what you developed in Barcelona. My question is, you have 60 cities on board. What happened to the other 99% of the cities around the world? This is obviously, it's not a critique, obviously. It's just a question. How can we help cities build innovation agendas if they don't have the resources for that? My recommendation is that we build innovation agendas incrementally based on what exists. True, this is a story about New York, but the drivers apply to any other city. You can see Aveiro there. You can see Cascais there. Or even Porto Covo, the small fisherman village where I spent my vacation, my summer, since I was a kid, in Alentejo. The drivers are there. So, a specific case to end my presentation, and I have 2 minutes, wow, okay. So I'm okay not getting into the specifics because we already learned so much from Barcelona and from Cascais about the power of sharing data and the power of creating new public-private partnerships around data and urban innovation. So I'm happy that all presentations come together. So I work with New Lab. New Lab is the largest urban tech incubator in New York. They are housed in Brooklyn. And with them, we created the prototype. We wanted to create a new form of public-private partnership where a series of startups and a series of city agencies working these 3 topics. So we had 3 specific urban challenges that we wanted to address: resilience, mobility, and economic growth. And the question is, how can we create the incentive systems to have startups share data with city agencies and city agencies share data with startups? And how much value is that created, both for city agencies, better equipped to address these challenges, and to startups to expand their business model? It was not easy at the beginning. Why am I going to spend startups teams? Why am I going to spend time, very precious of my time, to meet with researchers, to try to answer this question? And the city agencies in New York are very, very large. Why would they spend time with startups? Well, the interesting thing is that the Cornell Tech team that I invited worked with the mobility, Columbia University worked with resilience and organic waste collection, and the NYU team worked with economic growth. And the question is there value in sharing data beyond monetization mechanisms? And this is important. Most of the data sharing, I'm glad there are exceptions, and Barcelona is championing that. Most of the data sharing mechanisms that exist are based on the typical demand and supply matching with the price. So currency or money being the exchange mechanism. The issue again is cities have a tremendous amount of capacity and other assets other than money to engage in these partnerships. So, for example, startups at Numina, a startup working in sensors and traffic flow, had access to city infrastructure to place more sensors. In exchange, the Department of Transportation had access to micro-mapping level information and data that, for example, Google cannot provide. I know that I run out of time. The point, my message here today is that we need to build smarter public-private partnerships to help all cities around the world build innovation agendas. And that means cities that literally, mathematically, and in accounting terms have no resources to embark in science fiction, smart cities. And specifically, and I'm so happy that there was that in common today in our presentations, how can data access be democratized, and how can artificial intelligence developments be shared and developed for the common good?